Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here for one of our first in-person events since March 2020. I'd also like to welcome those tuning in today on Zoom and joining us from Western New York and beyond. We're in this wonderfully upgraded space in the Baldies Institute, and as you can see, there's microphones everywhere, so it will catch conversations throughout the room, and we're recording it live. I just want to give you the heads up. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land upon which the University of Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. I'm Carrie Tirado-Brayman, Director of the UB Gender Institute, and I'm honored to welcome Silvia Federici to the University of Buffalo. I really should say welcome back, because Professor Federici received her doctorate from UB in the philosophy department in 1980, and I encourage you to read her brilliant dissertation on Lukács realism. And there's always a Buffalo connection. This is further confirmation of my theory here. Since leaving UB, she has gone on to write several books, the most recent of which, The Patriarchy of the Wage, is for sale in the front of this room with a special discount for us today. And you're welcome to have Professor Federici sign your copy of her book after today's lecture. There's also reception food. You're welcome to have some of that now and after the lecture. The New York Times recently described Professor Federici as one of the most important socialist feminist thinkers of the 20th century. And I can't imagine a better speaker to kick off our year-long series at the Gender Institute on social reproduction theory. Before I turn it over to my colleague, Katja Protnick, to introduce Professor Federici, I first want to say a few words about the series, upcoming events, as well as thank those who've made this series possible. The series on social reproduction began at the height of the global pandemic, when a group of faculty and graduate students from various departments met virtually to discuss the impact of SARS-2 and the impact that has had on caregiving, child rearing, and the invisible labor that social reproduction entails. The global pandemic led to the coining of the term essential work, which intensified the political issues related to the value of socially reproductive labor, which has been historically feminized and racialized and often unpaid and informal. So I want to thank the members of the organizing committee, Katja Protnick, Marian Werner, Yige Dong, and Jim Holston, as well as the graduate students, Surabi Pant, Gabriela Nasi, and Joey Sechrist, for a year-long collaboration that resulted in a Baldy Center grant. We are grateful to the Baldy Institute, including Carolyn Funk and Shiva Delosier, for helping us plan this series. And I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Departments of Philosophy, English, History, and Arts Management. And finally, I'm grateful to my team at the Gender Institute, Surabi Pant and Becky Burke, for all their work behind the scenes, a form of invisible labor in many ways right there. I also want to invite everyone to the same room tomorrow at 3 p.m. You can tune in via Zoom, but you'll miss the cake at the reception. I'll give you that as an enticement to attend Katja Protnick's conversation on her recently published book, Artwork, Invisible Labor, and the Legacy of Yugoslav Socialism. I've been reading it and it's terrific. And Professor Federici will kindly offer commentary on that book, and it will lead, no doubt, to a fascinating intergenerational conversation about the past, present, and future of social reproduction thought. Some updates. On October 27th, so save the date in 1 month, we will welcome our second speaker of the series, Professor Pramila Nadesan. You know her? And she's a professor at Barnard of History, and the title of her talk, How Capitalism Created Care Work. That's happening October 27th, I believe at 3:30 in this room. In the spring, again, save the date on your calendar, Wednesday, March 15th. We still don't have a time, but we will soon. We will have a panel discussion as part of the series with Kianga Yamada Taylor, who is one of the most important public intellectuals writing today. She's become a bard of Buffalo in the pages of the New Yorker, and she will be joined by India Walton, recent mayoral candidate here in Buffalo, and Rava Gramatsian, director of the grassroots fair housing organization, Push Buffalo. And then finally, in April, Alessandra Massaggi from SOAS, University of London, will be speaking about the informal garment industry in India and its role in a global understanding of social reproduction. So I hope to see you at one or more of these upcoming events. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Katya Posnick, who will introduce Professor Federici.
Okay. I will not take too much more time. So it is a great honor to present Silvia Federici, a militant activist, a passionate teacher, and an astute scholar and writer as the signature lecturer of the Social Reproduction Speaker Series. Silvia Federici, in fact, needs no introduction, considering her following outside and inside academia and the great impact of her important body of work. I will refrain from rehearsing the titles of all the seminal books and texts she has written for this occasion, but I would like to stress Silvia Federici's connection to the city and university where, as you heard, she received her doctorate, and which were one of the first landing posts upon her arrival in these United States. Already back in her student years, in the late 60s, she was sharp and eloquent and a committed student activist. A case in point that I'd like to share with you are opening sentences in her review of a book by Althusser that she wrote for the journal Telos. This is what she said. It is a common trait of mediocre philosophers, she begins, to project their own ideas into philosophers of the past, so that they can, she continues, serve us all the tools necessary to update Marxism so that it can attain the honorific status of a science and thus become respectable among all the rest of the irrelevant academic disciplines. Federici never had to stoop down to that level to make Marx's insights relevant for the feminist struggle. Instead, she broke new grounds, uncovering the existence of a large area of exploitation in the field of social reproduction that was unrecognized by all the revolutionary theorists until then. She did so together with her tribe of women and feminists, as she likes to call them. Inspired by the work of Maria Rosa de la Costa and Selma James, she became involved in Wages for Housework campaign and started this campaign in the United States in 1972. Since then, her writing and activism have had a profound impact on the actual lives of women, but also on the feminist struggle, and more broadly, the terrain of social reproduction or the production of life. Not only is Sylvia a master of writing in a language that speaks to and makes impact on unhallowed or non-experts, but she also possesses an incredible sense of humor and irony that runs throughout her writing and work. Finally, Sylvia's work and life has always been connected and in close contact with the material conditions of working women's lives and their political struggles. She has never lost sight of that reality, for which she has offered groundbreaking analysis that help us to this day to formulate strategies to free ourselves from the scars centuries of exploitation has left on us, as she put it in one of her critical reflections about the feminist struggle. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sylvia.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you to the Gender Studies program and to the university and to all of you, for having invited me. It's really a great pleasure to be here, coming back to Buffalo, where, as Katya said, I landed in 1967, not knowing that it was so cold. But I lived here some of the most important years of my life, and certainly my politicization, was incredibly intensified on the campus in those years. So it's a special honor to be back. Also, I'm very encouraged about the interest that there is today on the question of social reproduction, because in the 1970s, I was part of a small group of feminists who really made the issue of reproduction and what today is more commonly called social reproduction a center of our political activism and of our feminist struggle. And at that time, we were really, in a way, a minority. And it was a struggle, certainly in the academic work, but also outside the academic work, to make people understand, how crucial the question of reproductive work and production in general is, for women in particular, but for the world population. So what I'll do today, social reproduction, roughly speaking, is a category that refers to all the activity and social relations that are necessary for the reproduction of our life, and the reproduction of social relations, and in a capitalist society as the one in which we live, also the reproduction of the workforce. So it's to speak of it, it's really to speak of a universal of activities. And in 45 minutes an hour as I have, it's going to be not an easy job for me to compress it into a few key issues. So what I'll do for today, I'm going to, in a way, give a bit of a sense of the history of this category, not just as an analytic category, but as a concept of struggle. Maria Mies, as you probably know, German feminist, has written really crucial works, Patriarchy and Accumulation on the world scale, and developed this concept of struggle, concept that has been central to open up new terrains of struggle. And that's the way I will want to talk about social reproduction. And then also look at the crisis that we are living today. Certainly, it's not a new crisis. I would say that, since the beginning of capitalism, social reproduction has been in crisis. The capitalism as a system, and this is a theme that runs through all my work, does not guarantee our life. On the contrary, it's a system that has, continuously subordinated well-being, prosperity, the value of life, to the motive, the profit motive. And as a result, as we know, a whole history of enslavement, enjailment, and today, threats even to life on Earth. But I will speak of the crisis also in the way it affects us, particularly in the United States, more directly. And then what we can do about it, or what is being done about it. Because there is a tremendous amount of work activism that is taking place in this country and beyond, that it's already given us a hope that significant social transformation are possible, right? So I prepared some notes, but I'm not good. I never really read my notes because I prefer I get inspired by actually looking at people. I get more energy and intuition, insights by looking at my papers. But roughly speaking, I want to say some, historical notes about where the issue, the concept of reproduction originates, and it is in the 18th century when you had French economists, the physiocrats, who were beginning to try to understand, how a capitalist economy worked, that they began to adopt the concept of reproduction that until then had been a concept dominant in the natural sciences, right, to indicate how organisms reproduce themselves. So the 18th century is really the moment of migration. For those of you who are, interested, in the history of concept, the moment of migration of reproduction from the natural sciences to the social. And the physiocrats, these economists, began to see that looking at society, there were processes that were totally interdependent, and there were flows that were connected, flows of economic activities that were connected. And so the notion of the social, the notion that we don't have discrete, separate events, but we have, in fact, systemic realities. And this is the concept that by the mid-19th century is actually operating, adopted by socialist writers. Certainly Marx in Capital used social reproduction to basically describe overall how the capitalist system reproduces itself, right? And he began to look at the organization of work, the way labor, the wealth is continuously valorized and accumulated, the possible crisis of the system, etc. Right? And Marx also looked at used the concept of social reproduction, to describe how the workforce, and in particular how labor power, which means our own capacity to work, right, is reproduced. Very interesting, insisted that labor power, people's capacity to work, is not something that is naturally given. Right? It's not something, but it has to be as a product. It's a product of activities. But the way he described this reproduction, in fact, those of you who are reading Patriarchy of the Ways, you will see I have a full critique of it, because Marx described in a very reductive way, right? So the reproduction of the worker, of labor power, takes place only through the market. I think that's a capitalist idea, by the way. The market reproduces that, right? So, the workers have a wage, they buy the commodities, the necessities for life, which are very few in Marx, like fuel, food, clothing. I discovered not even sex that was mentioned. I saw no word about housework. But Marx said something important, which in a way then percolated into some feminist thinking, which is that the work that produces the worker is as important to the production of capital. The work that produces our capacity to work is as important to the overall production of capital as any other work, right? As the work in the factory and the work that produces any commodity for the market, right? Now, this partially this insight was really percolated into feminist thinking, and particularly feminists in Italy, in England, who were trying to understand how to reconcile. This was feminism, the issue of gender, and the issue of class, right? What was the relation? This was a major question. For some, it still is a question. What is the relation between gender and class? And to understand this concept that what we call domestic work, housework, is in fact the work of producing labor power, is in fact in a capitalist society a form of production, that it is not a personal servant, as it has often been defined, qualified, but it's actually a form of production, has on the same level as the kind of production that occurs, for example, in an industrial outfit, right? It's part of a whole broad process that in fact is essential for the accumulation of capitalist wealth, right? So this insight of the productivity, of the production of labor power, was extremely important, to actually open up a new feminist perspective, on the roots of gender discrimination. on the social roots of the fact that in the history of capitalism, into the present, women have occupied a subordinate position, right? And so this analysis, in a way was a kind of a Copernican revolution, because it really shifted, for many of us. I want to quote here, by the way, in terms of the feminists to contribute most directly to this perspective. Maria Rosa della Costa in Italy, Selma James in England, Leopoldo Fortunati, with this book, which is going to be published through my verso, The Arcane of Reproduction, right? That begin a whole analysis that in part was inspired by Marx, but also was strongly inspired, by the literature of the anti-colonial movement, because the anti-colonial struggle, in the 60s and 70s, really, to use the words of Robin Kelly, decenter the conception of who is the productive worker in capitalism, right? In other words, through the history of the socialist and Marxist movements, the idea of the central worker, the productive worker, the one who produces the wealth of the capitalist class, the one who produces all the great world of commodities by which we are surrounded, and therefore is also the subject of the revolutionary process, because he knows, what the process of production is. He knows how to keep the system going, right? This was always the wage worker. But as Robin Kelly pointed out, by the 60s, with the climax of the anti-colonial struggle across the world, you begin to have a very different perspective. That is centering and seeing that actually, in the history of capitalism, wealth has been produced, right, by the slave, wealth has been produced by the colonized, right, who in a way were even more essential, because they were not only worked to death, but their labor that they provided was never compensated, was never, so it was pure accumulation of wealth. So the idea that in fact we have to stop looking at capitalist production, as coinciding with wage labor, and instead look at whole vast world of wageless people, of the unwaged. Right? Today we'll also add the informal workers. Right? In fact, if anything, the world of the wageless has even increased. Far from there was a conception that the development of capitalism, right, would increase, would actually produce a universe of wage workers. In fact, we're seeing the opposite, which really this development tells us the truth as to who is the most important producer of wealth. Because with the development of capitalism, the war capitalist has gained dominance over his own history, over his own power. It has in fact favored, it has in fact struggled to produce a world of wageless, right? Of, as I said, the colonized, those who are enslaved in very different ways. Enslavement has many forms. Even today, it continues. Slavery, as many would agree, has never ended. And of course, so is connected, the situation of millions and millions of proletarian housewives, their unpaid labor, their unpaid status, with the vast world of wages, who in fact have supported and produced the capitalist wealth, but whose work has never been recognized, has never been compensated, has always been made invisible. And we basically turn the table on the traditional leftist account, which argued that women have been discriminated in capitalism because they've been excluded right? They've been excluded from productive work, right? And all the socialist movement, including socialist women, including socialist feminists, from Kolontai to Rosa Luxemburg and so forth, have always seen the emancipation of women as leaving the kitchen and going into the factory. Side by side with men, they would gain their equality that presumably was denied to them because of being confined to a work that was a non-capitalist work, right? I think we basically rejected the view and suppose that in fact, this work has been invisibilized, unrecognized, not because it is not productive of capital, but rather because, you know, the invisibilization has been the source of enormous amount of profit, right? In this way, this work continues. You know, an army of women for generations could be mobilized to work from morning to night in all kinds of capacities without any form of compensation, except the indirect compensation through their dependency on the wage worker. And as I said before, this was a Copernican revolution because in a way it was the key that opened, that allowed us to answer many questions that we had, right? You know, what is the base of patriarchal relation? Why capitalism that presumably has revolutionized all relations in the world, has turned upside the relation of many societies, still, you know, has reconstituted forms of patriarchy, still a reconstituted male dominance, right? And we saw that through the male dominance, you know, the male dominance has been the vehicle for a form of indirect rule by which the state capital has delegated to the wage worker, to the man, the husband, you know, the new form of the patriarch, you know, the right, the possibility to control the work of the women, right? So that in a way, this has been a very, very productive form of dominance and exploitation, because women have never confronted capital directly. Many women, those in the position of housewife, have not confronted capital directly. But every time they wanted to refuse their work or the conditions of their work, have always found in front of themselves people they love, you know, a husband, a father, children, and so forth. And that has been very difficult for them to make a struggle, because the dominance of capitalism over their life, the fact that capitalism, that the same kind of rule and constriction and constraints that shape the life of a worker in a mine or in a factory or in other workplaces, actually apply to his wife, to his family, to the organization of their daily reproduction. No, that was made very invisible. And so for us, and of course, the question of violence, domestic violence, why the state has always tolerated domestic violence. We realize domestic violence was part of the supervision of domestic work, right? That allowing men to punish women physically and psychologically, to punish women if they didn't comply. The house is dirty, the children are making too much noise, looks, the food is not ready, and coming home, the food is cold. So much of domestic violence has been originated. She doesn't want to have sex at night, you know, she's too tired, and she says, I worked all day, etc., etc. We were also collecting testimonies from women about their day-to-day life. And this was becoming very clear that at the basic of domestic violence, you know, you had a lot of refusal of housework. And the fact that the violence, it took a women's movement to assert that beating your wife is a form of assault on a person's body, on a person's psyche, is not just an outburst of passion. It's not just that they can be done by, you know, taking the man around the house and helping him smoke a cigarette. So it was a very important, and but for us, the discussion of social reproduction was never, as it wasn't for Marx, by the way. When Marx, uncovered social reproduction, he did not uncover only a terrain of analysis, but a terrain of action. He really, in describing the process of social reproduction, Marx met really a program for action. In a sense, it was the same for us, not that I want to paddle ourselves on Marx. So for us, it was very clear that the condition of women, even though the condition of the working class housewife was not a universal condition. This is very important. For example, in the case of the Black community, Black women always had to have a job outside the home, as they could not rely on a steady, paycheck. They could not rely on a husband providing a regular, income. So in a way, they always had. But what would be the majority of their work? In fact, Pramila Narasimhan, who's coming next time, she's going to tell you, because she's written a fantastic book. She's written a lot of many things, but one fantastic book on the struggle of Black women, Black domestic workers, in this country. And so the devaluation that the work of domestic workers, suffered, for us was a directly connected, with the devaluation that in capitalism, reproductive work, the work of reproducing human being, of reproducing our capacity to work, has undergone historically, right? Certainly the question of racism, the whole legacy of slavery, in profound impact. We should never forget that. But undoubtedly, the devaluation of domestic work, the devaluation of reproduction, the reproduction of life, right, has been at the center of the devaluation of women's work. In every place, we have found ourselves. In every place we have found. So from that point of view, we decided also to launch a campaign for wages for housework. And it's a campaign that's been often very, very misunderstood, because it has been, wages for housework has been often interpreted as a kind of a union demand, right? Little money, and then we do the work, and etc. Not that the little money was to be split upon, right? Because in fact, we discovered that for many women, the little money was really the difference. It was really a qualitative difference between the ability to go out of the home, abandon, for example, a violent husband. It was the ability to have some day extra in which they could be with their children instead of having to go to work every day. The ability to refuse jobs. They were really below subsistence and in very precarious, dangerous conditions. So they actually, the little money meant a lot for many, many women. But also, we saw the Wages for Housework campaign as opening up, as actually, throwing the light on what this work is, and beginning a process of making the government, making capital, making the employer responsible for the question of social reproduction, making them responsible, and also showing that in fact, we work for them, that in fact, millions of women actually work directly for them, that even though they work through the organization of the family as a little factory, we began to see that the family was a little, the house, the home, a little factory, that not just an appendix of the real factory, but really the support, right? In fact, we began to realize that it's not that the family, the home is independent, but actually is domestic work, housework, is the condition of existence for thousands and thousands of other activities. Because without the production of the worker, there's no production of any other product. This is the part of the capitalist assembly line that in fact really produces, right, the living work, which is the essential, indispensable ingredient, you know, of the accumulation of wealth, right? So we began to realize that we had to throw the light on that process, throw the light on what is actually taking place in the home, throw the light on the price the women had paid, you know, for their dependency, and how the family that is romanticized as a place of love and harmony, etc., and provides support, and provide. It's also the family has a contradictory role, provide in fact lots of support, but nevertheless, in that family, hierarchies were built. Hierarchies were built that shape the relation of parents and parents to children at each point. Who gets the space? Who gets the right to vacation? Who gets the right to, you know, being left alone and having some time to recuperate energy and so forth, right? You know, who works at Christmas and who has a, in fact, sees Christmas as a period of rest, etc. Who has the right, the possibility to retire at the end of a work life, and who instead keeps working until they die. And we saw the housework not only is the work of reproducing the living, is also the work, and I think it came out so clearly with COVID, with the COVID pandemic, is the work of helping people to die. And that's the most difficult work on earth. The most difficult work on earth is also the difficult of assisting those who are ill, those of chronic illnesses, and those who we know have to die. So we decided that to have this campaign because the campaign, as I said before, would illuminate this reality, you know, and also because unless we dealt with this issue, with the fundamental devaluation of women as a social subject, the fundamental devaluation of women, that in a way, somehow, somewhere, even women who were not housewives, even women who didn't have children, in a way, because the large number of women were housewives, that this, in a way, defined every woman in the society, although with different degrees, you know, of entanglement. So we decided that we needed to have a kind of struggle that basically changed our position, that basically would create a whole new negotiation, not only between women and men. The sharing the work with men was not enough, even though, of course, sharing the work with men would be necessary. But the sharing the work with men will not change the fundamental relation of housework to capital. This was very important because so many families saw sharing the work with men as the solution. But we said no, because in a way, the organization of work was such that even the sharing with men would be very difficult, because often it was men who brought the largest amount of income to the house. And so if the men forfeited their jobs, the family would starve. So, yeah, it was clear, for instance, that the kind of work the women get when they go outside the home, nursing, teaching, elementary, daycare, all undervalued and underpaid, right? Recently, some women teachers, elementary teachers from Raipur in India, they read a pamphlet that I wrote, an article I wrote in the 70s, where they spoke about the housewife. And they said, oh, this was great because really described our situation. You know, elementary teachers, you know, they are housewives, completely devalued. The money that they earn is nothing. And they're expected to do a tremendous amount of work, teaching, emotional. And so much more to say, but the feminist movement did not. Wages for Housing never became enough movement. And this was very unfortunate because also a third reason for us the campaign was so important is that together with the rise of feminism, there was also the rise of a welfare mothers movement in this country that I encourage you all to learn about. It's called the welfare mothers movement because the majority of women, were women with children who were receiving a subsidy from the state because they didn't have a husband, the children were too young and no way to support them. The movement was very powerful, and I always said that was the first wages for housework movement in the country, because these women were saying, raising children is a job that we do for society. We don't want to be treated as object of charity. The state thinks that they're going to make this great charity, the welfare is a charity. Welfare is not a charity. If only the time when we are entitled to be seen as workers is when we work for the children of another woman, we'll swap our children. They were even proposing we'll swap our children, so they will finally recognize that we are working. Raising our children is a job. The factories are always claiming our children as workers. The army claims our children as soldiers. But when we have for support for the work that we do, then we are told that we are parasites, on the real working class. And in fact, there was a whole campaign. You are too young, most of the people in this room are too young to remember the kind of divisive and racist campaign, because the majority of the women in the room were Black women, not because welfare was predominantly, the people receiving welfare were predominantly Black, which was not, predominantly were white women. But the Black women, because of the Black Power movement, because of the civil rights movement, they were the ones most organized, most ready to fight. And so the stigma, on the parasitism was accompanied with a massive racist campaign. Unfortunately, and I think I've criticized it over and over and over, I think this was a moment of defeat for the feminist movement. The feminist movement did not pick up the struggle, neither the struggle for welfare. There was no mobilization in support of welfare mothers. Some feminists did, but there was no massive support for the struggle of welfare women and for the campaign for wages for housework. One extra reason, and I think the fundamental reason is that there was this mythology, this was idea that it was only by working outside the home, it was only by entering the wage labor force that we'll begin to gain the kind of autonomy and sociality women dreaded to be confined to the home. Capitalism has organized the home in such an individualized base that for women has become almost a prison in many cases, because you're stuck at home, particularly when you have young children, for days and days and months. So there was this idea that once you go outside the home and work outside, not only you have money of your own, but you also have a whole social life. That has turned out to be, for many women, for some it has been realized, but for many women it's turned out to be completely false, as isolated on the work, the wage workplace as much as in the home. But also this is the period. We're talking about the mid-late 70s and 80s, when we have a massive intervention by the United Nations into the feminist field. The United Nations, right, which really in a sense expresses, the viewpoint of the highest level of capitalism, right, of international capital, in a way they saw in a moment in which capitalism was facing a crisis due to the anti-colonial struggle, a crisis due to the massification of blue-collar workers' struggle across the United States, but also across Europe and other countries. In other words, by the mid-70s, capitalism was facing a crisis. The Club of Rome, which is basically like a representative of high level of capitalist intelligentsia, by 1972 was calling for zero growth. Zero growth meant don't invest, freeze investment because investment are not productive. Because of generalized work, we can go more in detail into this, but so it is in front of this crisis, which I would argue was fundamentally a labor strike crisis, that you have the beginning at the end of the 70s of a restructuring of the global economy, of a massive restructuring. And part of the restructuring was the opening of the door to millions of women to enter wage labor, and with their cheap labor in a sense, compensate for the crisis. The restructuring of the global economy, the export from Europe and the United States of massive industrial outfits to the former colonies, right? The change to the service sector as the dominant backbone of the economy in Europe and the US. All of that was done, with the cheap labor of women, right? And the promise, I think, 4 decades later, we can see that the promise that working outside the home, leaving the home, held for many feminists has not been realized. For a limited number of women, it is true, it has provided a different kind of life. Although we did a whole analysis, in our campaign to so-called the better jobs that women could get when they would go out of the home. And we discovered that many of them, they seem to be better paying, better providing more security, better payment, more social conditions, were also jobs that demanded that women discipline other women, were also jobs that, demanded, were built on women occupying roles that gave them a certain hierarchical power over other women. For example, in the group I was in, which is for Housing in New York, we had many social workers. And the social worker began to analyze their work. And they realized that they were talking to women saying, no, that's not too bad. Back, talk to your husband, he will understand, etc., etc. It was a whole way of reintegrating women. Social work really meant reintegrating women in impossible situations, but making them more capable of accepting, right? So we kind of warned against, placing too much hope in the more creative jobs. But for the majority of women, that has not also been the case. For the majority of women enter massively the wage workplace in this country at the moment in which wage work was losing all the benefits it had in the past. Women enter a wage work where work was precarized, underpaid, right? Where you had to have sometimes 2-3 jobs in order to actually be able to support the family. When the male wage was collapsing, right? And what do we find? After a number of years, most of these women are overworked. The health condition deteriorated. The life expectancy for women, working class women, white and black, has decreased, has actually fallen down over the years, right? And one very, very, very important new element, most of these women are in debt, right? Most of the women, and this is actually becoming a global situation, not only in the United States, but even limiting ourselves to the United States. With the second job or third job has come a situation of indebtedness, the income earned through working outside the home for most jobs in this country is so low that, in fact, many have to rely again on form of subsidy from the state in order to be able to survive, or have to use financial means like payday loan, right? Payday loan is loan that you obtain from company on the day you get your pay. They don't ask you for any collateral, but they impose interest rate of 50%. So you work, and fall into that more and more until all at the same time, you have to choose between paying the electrical bill or buying more grocery for your family. Or you use your credit card and you go from credit card to credit card until your credit collapses. So that has emerged as a key issue, in terms of, and in fact, it's also emerging, I'll talk about it later, as a key feminist issue of mobilization. That has to be placed because across the world, right, the second job, entrance into the wage workforce has come hand in hand. And why? On one side, as I said before, because the jobs do not pay enough. But on the other side, because the whole neoliberal drive has been to undermine any form of investment in social reproduction. Neoliberalism, at the essence, the backbone of neoliberalism has been, in fact, the destruction, the undermining, the reduction of any investment. And in fact, when we throw our sight, when we look beyond, particularly the rural areas of the world, Latin America, Africa, that we see that one of the key drive in neoliberal policy, has been the displacement of millions of people from their land, because the land has been, not only agriculture has been industrialized, right, but over and over and over, it has been privatized. So the privatization of land, the displacement of millions of people has also gone hand in hand with the curtailment of investment in education, investment in healthcare, transport, popular transport, basic necessities, basic utilities, right? So now you have an army of women who are earning a wage, but then they have to pay much more for their care, much more for their bills, much more. And so what we began to realize is that today women are even more exploited. A large number of women is even more exploited than they were, their mothers, 3 decades ago, because the exploitation was taking place, right, through taking away their labor. Capitalism was profiting from the unpaid housewife, right, by having all the services of producing a worker for free. Now, the same women still do a lot of housework. I'm going to say that with the restructuring of the global economy, we have always seen a lot of domestic work now performed by migrant women. But the majority of working class women will not be able to hire another person, which is, of course, it's not at all an ideal situation. But what they will do, they will carry on their housework in the night, in the weekends, in the morning before going to, their workplaces. Right? So now women are exploited on the second job, exploited as a domestic worker, maybe working in the night or on Sunday instead of recuperating, and also exploited, through the process that we call the financialization of social reproduction, which means that every moment of social reproduction is becoming a moment of accumulation, right? You go with your credit card and you pay something with the credit card. Your payday loan, you take a loan in order to pay the electricity bill, and then you pay interest on the loan. So there is what women in Argentina have called the financial extractivism. They now speak of financial extractivism, right? with the neoliberal capital, you have a lot of extractivism. You know, the companies mining petroleum have gone around the world and taking over lands and taking over minerals, etc., to produce digital equipment. But there's a financial extractivism that is taking place on one side by the cutting of investment in social reproduction. So the people have to continuously plunge, and women in particular, into that, and then use all these financial means, which are turning our daily activity, the shopping and so on, into moments of accumulation, into moments of capitalist accumulation. So this is a reality that has deep repercussion, you know. So now the crisis that we are facing, and I'm limiting the crisis now to the question of domestic work, reproduction, on this, let's call it on a smaller scale, right? And we can see that this has had very, very negative consequences. You know, working outside our home has not been a solution, is not providing a solution. On the contrary, and the third avenue has been the marketization of large area of social reproduction. As you know, this is like on everybody's lips, right? Now the market. So the market, the fast food, everybody knows, and therefore I'm not going to go into detail. But we already know the consequences, particularly from the point of view of health, right? The children being born obese, right? We know that the health condition have tremendously deteriorated because of the fact that now we, added to the fact that more and more agriculture is being industrialized, and therefore the land is becoming more poisonous, food is becoming more poisonous. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
They're emailing us.
Oh. So, yes, and of course, it has also psychological consequences, because less and less, we have the possibility, for example, the effects of women's absence from the home for a long period of time, parents' absence from the home, on children, on the elderly. This is a whole chapter that the rise. We have heard much about, and justifiably, about the number of people that died of COVID. We haven't heard enough about the fact that every year twice as many people died of cancer. Cancer clearly related to environmental condition, to the condition of food, the condition of the air, to the condition of the water. We don't hear about the fact that more people have died every year of cancer than have died of COVID. Also the increase in the number of suicides, the increase in the number of young people who are actually inflicting wounds on themselves. I mean, recently there's been a lot of program. I don't know if you also have heard the same program, and I'm now focusing on the United States. So already from this point of view, it's becoming clear, and I think there's a broad diffused awareness, that we live in a society that is not capable of guaranteeing our reproduction, that our social reproduction is in a very deep, deep crisis, and our society is not able. If we add to that, right, that the organization of social life is continuously producing inequalities, if we add, in fact, the continuous production, of racism and the militarization of everyday life, that goes in a way hand in hand, with the fact that forms of impoverishment, that there is a generalized impoverishment that is taking place, and therefore the continuous construction of inequality, of blaming the poor, blaming those for their own impoverishment and immiseration, right? Then we see that we are in a crisis that is very deep, and of historic proportion. And of course, when we broaden our look, our sight to the international situation, that this is only confirming, because we know today that everywhere social reproduction is really a process of social immiseration, and the restructuring of the global economy, with this massive drive to privatize land, its massive drive to displace people from their ancestral home, turn entire population into refugees, migrant refugees, massive refugee camp. The system of production, mining, fossil fuel, etc., that are producing desertification of entire regions. I mean, we could speak now a week, as you know, but I know that right? The process of deforestation, climate change, everything, so they were turning into, a world of sacrifice zone. Actually the term sacrifice zone has actually come into existence, and it's been used increasingly, to describe areas of the world that are so contaminated that presumably nobody can live there. They're called sacrifice zone, where concentration of chemical industry, right? But the world is really becoming a sacrifice zone. And a sacrifice zone is really a sacrificed population, right? So the COVID pandemic has in a way been a moment of truth, right? As scary and isolating, as dividing as it has been. At the same time, it's also opened a window on the fact that our lives are in danger. And COVID now is finished, but then we have monkeypox, and then we have a return of polio, and we are told that no, it's not finished, it's going to be, there will be a new epidemic, and prepare. And all is vaccine. And I don't want to talk about vaccine, of course, no, right? But we're talking about people, whose daily life, millions and millions, his daily life have been undermined, right? By not having the resources necessary for our reproduction, by being exposed to continuously to a system where violence is at every corner, and I mean institutional violence, the police, the war, continuous warfare, increased budget, military budget that are ballooning and ballooning and ballooning. Imagine what the budget that is gone into the military, there was approved this year, would have done if applied to the schools, if applied to healthcare, if applied to community or being historically, underinvested, right? So we are facing a crisis that I think is historic. And here I want to repeat what I said before. Clearly, from the beginning of capitalism, this world has been in crisis. Not to suggest the previous system were different, more humanitarian, but certainly this system in which we live has a 500 and more year of history of slavery, and creation of other forms of racialization, colonization, displacement of population from their land, and exploitation of human labor on a global scale, etc., right? But so the crisis has always been there. It's not that this world was a good world and then COVID opened the crisis. But I think that today, right, there is a more great awareness of the crisis. I was talking with a number of students before, and I was saying that for the whole period over the last 50 years, the 50 years in which I've been a kind of an adult, or maybe 60, there was always a moment that it seems, oh, things are changing. End of World War II, not the end, excuse me, end of the anti-colonial war, right? The beginning of independence, the end of slavery first. Now slavery, now we know that slavery has never ended. The end of colonialism. We know the colonialism has not ended. We have now, globalization has been a process of recolonization. Recolonization with financial means. Everybody's got their national flag. But now every state in Africa is completely dependent, right? They've mortgaged everything in those countries, in the continent, is mortgaged for generations to come, unless there is a sustained victorious struggle. Is mortgaged because the African debt is ballooned. And the very idea of an African debt is an incredible scandal and crime. How can Africa, the continent, have a debt? You know, when millions and millions of people have been taken away, when millions and millions and billions of tons of the most precious metals and diamonds and oil and petrol and so on, and the robbery continues. Robbery because it's really taken away. People are not benefit to it. You go in African villages and they don't even have electricity, you know. And so when we're talking about an African debt or a Latin American debt, right? When you know, the labor generation and generation of people from Latin America have been really made to work to death, you know, and as the sources of American companies, international companies, not only the United States. Right? So I think that the crisis today is more I'm looking for the word, in a sense that we are becoming more deeply aware of it, right? Is more felt because after this long period, after 500 years, in which, you know, people have told, oh, this is the best system on earth. It's progress, it's around the corner, right? And the maximum of development of technology, right? So technology is supposed to actually make life easier. It's supposed to lighten the burden of work. It's supposed to help us to go beyond scarcity. Now we see that the very technology, the promise to take us above scarcity, the promise to take us, you know, to a whole world, you know, in which we could enjoy the fruits of the earth, is actually, you know, becoming the instrument for a new dispossession, new wave of dispossession, right? And that new way of destruction of the earth, you know, the mining, the petroleum, etc. So I think that because of that, there is a more deep recognition that this system cannot guarantee our life, and that we need to create a different system that places, and I'm using the slogan of women in so many movements of Latin America, that a system built on a logic that places life at the center, built on a logic that places life at the center. How do we do that? If I have another 5 minutes, I can just throw a few words, and then I want to hear, I hope we have time to have some discussion, because these things are so important now. I think there are really issues of life and death, and I know you all work around them. So the question, clearly, it seems to me that in very broad general terms, is that, you know, we need a kind of movement, feminist movement to begin with, but also other social movements that engage in a process of recuperation, reclaiming of the social and the natural wealth that has been taken away from us, right? The reclaiming of the wealth. I think this is very crucial. I think that the plan of international capital today is to push us all into cities, to empty the rural areas of the world, to empty the places where you have really the substance of life, where you have the soil, where you have the water, where you have the forest, the trees, the animal. These are really the substance of life. To take us all away from there, or to keep us there only as, wage worker in different forms of enslavement, control, maybe by death squad, by company guards. So we stay there only to help the mining company to take out the fossil from the land. We stay there. But otherwise, everybody moved into the city so that we do not control the main elements that produce our life, right? And which means that we can be easily defeated. Because once we lose control on land, forests, trees, waters, really, our life is really seriously in danger, So this requires, obviously, connecting different movements together. I have to say that today, the feminist movement has grown. When we look at it, not just in the United States or in Europe, but we look at it globally, we see that there's been a major transformation in feminism, because today we have forms of feminism that precisely starting from the point of view of social reproduction, are seeing that the struggle is not only around the home, around housework, but the struggle is around the environment, is around taking healthcare out of the market. The struggle is about taking agriculture out of industrialization, restoring subsistence form of agriculture that are meant to nourish our body instead of poisoning them, as they do so often today because of the pesticide and so on. And also feminism that are declared openly anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti all kinds of discrimination and sexual basis. So I think we have a feminism that has a much broader perspective. Not to say that the feminism of the early 70s was not important. I think that too often we don't see how revolutionary that was. But I think that today we are in another world. And the feminism of today is a feminism that is also anti-war. For example, in the United States, we have an organization like Code Pink. Code Pink is not a massive organization, but one that should grow. Because they've had a major role, in the period of the war against Iraq. Today, the war in Ukraine. They've had a very powerful role in building a feminine perspective against war. A feminist perspective against war, and a perspective in which women, and feminists are the connective subject among the population that are being pushed into fighting each other, even when they are tied by long historical ties, as they are in Ukraine and Russia, as they are in Armenia and Azerbaijan today, where a new war is also being generated. So it seems to me that this question of reclaiming the land and also restructuring reproduction in a more collective way, together with reclaiming the land and restructuring reproduction in a more collective way. What does it mean? It means that we have to overcome the kind of isolation, in which production has been organized, since the beginning of a capitalist society, which separate the family, the nuclear family, the idea of privacy, so you don't tell your neighbor your problem, you don't even tell the people in your family, you live in a building and you don't know even the person on the same floor, which is happening now in a tremendous way, because so many communities have been torn apart. We need to reconstitute those links. And I don't think it's a utopia. I know there are people here from Latin America, and I think there's a lot to learn from them. Because particularly in regions like many African regions, Latin America, where we're seeing massive displacement from the rural areas, right? Not to accept defeat. We have seen people creating new communities, taking over land in the periphery of town, right? And creating new forms of commons with collective work, building streets, building popular kitchens, building urban farming, urban gardening. So that process of collectivizing, socializing, communing, as Peter Limbaugh said, reproductive life is already underway. And I think it needs all our support, right? It needs all our support. And well, I'll end to say that, of course, all these are fundamental steps, and each of us, I would say each of us has to find our place in this process. I was telling today, and that's obvious, none of us can fight against the whole, or organize, on every issue. But it's very important to understand that whatever we do, right, that whatever we do, we bring to our struggle the broader horizon, the broader transformative horizon, and see that what we do connects with the struggle of other people, connects with the struggle of other social movements. So we don't see our struggle isolated. And also connects with the struggle not only of the living, but the struggle of the past. There is a lot of work in social reproduction, is the restoration, reconstruction, and preservation of collective memory. The preservation of collective memory, that enables us to place what we do in a broader canvas of human liberation, that enable us to not be so concerned with our individual life and what happens to us and what risks we take, but also see that we are really part of something that goes beyond us. We are part of a broader body of people and a broader struggle. I think that, if we do that, then even if, the struggle that we make is about the garden, is about the childcare, it's about, a food kitchen, the struggle has tremendous possibilities because you will know how to connect with the others and be part of a broad transformation. Thank you so much.